This program is made possible by listeners who choose to support Frontlines and Backrooms. You can join our community of supporters through the link in the episode description. Thank you.
From Lisbon, Frontlines and Backrooms podcast. Your host, Vladimir Bobatik.
Lebanon is once again at the center of a conflict it cannot control, caught between regional escalation, internal collapse, and a war that no longer follows clear rules. Hezbollah is weakened but not gone. Israel is operating with a new doctrine. And the state itself is struggling to hold together under pressure that goes far beyond the battlefield. This is not just a question of war. It is a question of what remains of a country when war becomes permanent. My guest today is someone who has spent years working not only on analyzing conflict, but directly engaging in efforts to manage and resolve it. Dr. Randa Slim is non-resident fellow at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies at Foreign Policy Institute and has been deeply involved in track to diplomacy and conflict resolution process across the Middle East. Her work focuses on the intersection of war, politics, and negotiation, and what happens when those systems begin to break down. We began by asking whether what we are seeing now is in effect a shift toward something more permanent, a forever war. Dr. Slim, thank you so much for your time and welcome to Frontlines and Backrooms. Professor Nathan Brown recently said, Israel's leaders have concluded that they are in forever war against adversaries who have to be intimidated or even dispersed. You've studied Hezbollah for years. Is that an accurate reading of Israel's strategy, and what does forever war actually mean for Lebanon?
I think that's Hezbollah. That's Israel's strategy is to, weaken and disperse its enemies. For Hezbollah, it also suits them to be engaged in a never-ending resistance. In fact, entering into negotiations between Lebanon and Israel, bringing this permanent state of war into some kind of security arrangement. I don't think Lebanon is ready to go into normalization of relations between the two countries. There is not yet popular and legitimacy for that. And if we look at the precedent of the 1983 accord, which was between Israel and Lebanon, which was eventually terminated by the Lebanese in 1984, one of the primary causes for it not being able to survive was the lack of domestic consensus about normalization of relation between Lebanon and Israel. And that was in the 1980s, right? I think the situation now is a little bit more complicated. So for Hezbollah, a permanent state of resistance is something that, that is part of who they are. It is their political DNA. That's their raison d'etre. And the question is, can Hezbollah sustain this state of resistance for a long time after all the losses it has endured over the last 3-4 years? Not only leadership losses, but more importantly, the loss of Syria as a strategic depth, as a weapon supply route, conduit between Iran and Hezbollah. The loss of a very important leader for Hezbollah, Nasrallah. And so far, nobody has been able to step in his place. The loss of the two top tiers of military leaders who were part of the founding periods of Hezbollah. Those people had tremendous experience. They had a lot of trust in each other, and they knew how to work with each other. Those are all gone. Even if they get replaced by 2, 3 each, that's going to take a long time for these people to regain that experience, to regain that camaraderie, especially at a time when Hezbollah remained deeply, deeply infiltrated by Israeli Israeli intelligence. And so this currency, which was like the glue between the different layers and the different members of Hezbollah, which is trust in each other, total trust, has now been, you know, shattered. They have yet to be able to plug these holes, and to be able to regain that trust that is so integral to the functioning of the party. And so, yes, permanent state of resistance is something they welcome, that they think it will give them another lease on life, because right now they feel very much challenged domestically, but also regionally and also structurally for the reason I have just outlined. And so in a way, and on the other hand, Israel has also moved a lot since the days it occupied southern Lebanon between 1982 and 2000. Post October 7, Israeli society, I was just reading a poll this morning. 77% of Israelis want the war against Lebanon to continue. 77%. I mean, when I speak with people, Israeli experts, about the means that the Israeli army is now using, like what happens 2 days ago in Beirut, these 100, you know, uh, uh, attacks, airstrike within the span of 10 minutes, attacking civilians, not even Hezbollah leaders. Uh, People say, we do not question the means of the Israeli army or the means of the IDF that IDF uses to achieve its objective. And so that's where we are. We have a party that until recently was really at a very, very weak stage, meaning Hezbollah, and now it gets another lease on life. And then we have in Israel that is now, as you put it, quoting Nathan Brown, that is on a permanent footing of war, and trying to deny any kind of safe haven for their enemies. I mean, look at what Defense Minister Katz said about southern Lebanon and what they are planning in southern Lebanon. It's basically the Gaza playbook being deployed again in southern Lebanon. And he said, where there are terror groups, there are no residents, there are no civilians, it's permanent occupation. And the fear now, already among many people in Lebanon, is that Israel is now prepared, given the regional condition, maybe to stay much longer and to stay there forever, in this buffer zone. And we don't know yet how extensive it's going to be. And I think there is a debate inside Israel between the political establishment and the military establishment, but how deep they are going to go, into southern Lebanon, if this occupation continues. There is deep fear in Lebanon that it's going to be a prelude to annexation. This is about what, 10% of the country's territory. You have already more than 1.2 million people displaced from that area. These are people, predominantly Shia, but these are people who survived on farming, who survived on their lands. So now not only have they lost their homes, they also have lost their means of survival. And at a time when Lebanon is facing its most acute economic crisis, there are no jobs being created. There's no money to fund, alternative housing for these people. There's no money to create jobs for these people. And so if this state of affairs persists and continues, we are heading into a major, major social slash political crisis that might eventually lead to Lebanon's state collapse.
You mentioned a poll: 77% of the Israelis are supporting the war in Lebanon. The numbers are very similar regarding the war in Iran, and they have been even higher for the war in Gaza. If we add what you mentioned, that Israelis don't question the Netanyahu government in this, what does this tell us about the Israeli society at this point in time?
Look, I mean, I'm not an expert on Israel, but I work with Israeli colleagues. I have friends who are Israelis, and I seek their advice and their opinion out. I meet a lot of Israeli colleagues at conferences and we talk, and I'm told over and over and over about the trauma, the October 7th trauma, and how this has changed the Israeli society, at least for the foreseeable future. And in a way has enabled the continuation of the reign of Benjamin Netanyahu and his extreme right-wing colleagues, because they provide the narrative and and the politics that need this moment of a society that is unmoored, a society that's seeking revenge, a society that sees surrounded itself by enemies everywhere, and that is facing an existential threat. And that's what tells me about Israel. And that's going to be difficult for any leader. Israel is facing election at the end of this year, I don't know, maybe October. And even if we have a different leader than Netanyahu, I mean, I don't think any leader, even if it is from the left, is going to be able to do the kind of engage in the kind of transformational foreign policy that is required to move the region away from this permanent state of war and move Israel and the neighborhood into some kind of a new modus vivendi. Uh, it's going to be even that leader, no matter how charismatic he or she is, no matter how visionary he or she is, I think is going to find resistance from the population, right? I mean, a leader is by definition supposed to lead and create new pathways and bring the electorate along. But I think at this moment, given where Israeli society is, what public opinion polling tells us about Israeli society, and the deep polarization inside Israeli society. I mean, deep, deep, deep polarization. Talk about, you know, polarization here. Uh, it's going to be hard for any leader to create this moment of transformation. And most likely is going to build on the same narrative that Netanyahu, with minor changes on the margin, basically, to that narrative and to those policies.
When we talk about the regional context, something is missing. There are opinions that if there had been no Israel occupation of Lebanon between 1982 and 2000, we would not have Hezbollah today, and we would not talk about Hezbollah. Is that true and correct context?
I think so. I think so. I think 1982 was a moment Hezbollah was formed. Although I have to say, remember, after the Iranian Revolution, their emissaries, especially Mustafa Shamran, was sent to the south to work with the Amal movement, which predated Hezbollah, and to work with the Palestinians who were based in the south. And I think the seeds for Hezbollah were starting to be put even there. And that was part of the Iran Revolution export model, if we can put it this way. And they looked at Lebanon, and especially the Shia community, as being a good incubator in a way for this part of their foreign policy. And Lebanon being on the border with Israel and with fighting Israel and taking on the resistance, the resistance against Israel um, uh, leadership by the new Iranian regime. uh, it made sense, to basically create a group, a proxy that can lead a Lebanese proxy made up of Shia, right? That Iranians can work and trust with, and that they can become, the group, the force that carries on this legacy for Iran. And at some point over time, they became also part of the deterrence architecture for Iran against Israel and the United States, along with other proxies and groups that Iran started funding, but using the Hezbollah model. I always say, when I try to explain Hezbollah and Iran and the other proxies, I said, look at the franchise model in the United States. You start with one restaurant, you develop the menu, you test the menu, you train the people, you develop the training manual, you develop trainers, and then you use that and you try to replicate it everywhere else in similar situations. You adapt it here and there because the hamburger in Wyoming should taste maybe differently from, or because, for example, the McDonald's in Portland need to have a lobster sandwich, which the McDonald's in Ohio cannot have because we don't have lobsters. But but it's the same model, really. And so I think Hezbollah was the first overseas franchise of the Iranian Revolution. And they turned out to be a great franchisee, a great student, and great investment for Iran. And that's why, I mean, people right now say, oh, how can they? I mean, that's why I think as we talk about the negotiations that are happening over following the ceasefire between the US and Iran and the negotiation taking place in Islamabad, I think Lebanon and the fight and the attacks on Hezbollah might prove eventually to be the point or the cause of the collapse of these talks and of this fragile ceasefire. We are not there yet. I'm of the opinion that Iran has more of an interest to continue these talks, especially with a leadership that is trying to prove itself, that is facing very dire conditions right now, new leadership. So they have more interest in getting to a deal, in getting in getting the sanctions relieved, in and so if they cannot stop totally Israel's war against Hezbollah, will they, if they can get a lot of what they want to get from the Americans, will they sink the deal if Israel refuses to abandon the buffer zone, if Israel refuses to stop the attacks, right? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think the incentive calculus for the current Iranian leadership to get this deal, if they can get the deal under the right condition and the right deal, especially with the sanctions relief, I think the incentives are much higher, and they will look at the benefits as much higher than the cost that they're going to suffer from reputational costs, from credibility costs. And partly they will argue, oh, well, Hezbollah can take care of itself and they can take care of. And so that's why we are at a hinge moment now in terms of Iran and Iran's relationship with its allies and proxies. And everybody from the Hashd in Iraq to the Houthis to, other groups are looking at what's happening and how, Iran is going to try to save, protect, or abandon Hezbollah.
One of the mistakes regarding Hezbollah is to look at it just as an Iranian proxy and militia. But Hezbollah became a very strong political force in Lebanon. How did that fact change the dynamic of Lebanon as a country, and how much influence did they inject into the political life of Lebanon?
Wow, that's a big question. I think the critical period that was important for Hezbollah to emerge as a political player, which eventually had veto power over most of the decision of the government and the appointments to official position, was 2000, starting in 2000 when the Israelis did unilateral withdrawal from the southern zone, buffer zone that they had occupied since 1982. And as a result, Hezbollah claimed this victory and solidified its credential as not only a Lebanese actor, but also as a regional actor that has been able to defeat Israel, the mighty Israeli army and the mighty Israeli forces. And so it gained a lot of credibility, not only inside Lebanon, but also in the region, especially among groups that have always been anti-Israel. And so that's from 2000, and then I think until 2005, during which the Syrian army was present still in Lebanon and under the rule of Bashar al-Assad. Hezbollah gained a lot of power, partly because of the personal relationship between Bashar al-Assad and Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, and partly because uh, the weakness of the other domestic actors who were not able to contest the growing power, political power, and military power of Hezbollah. 2000 was an important point because with the unilateral withdrawal of the Israelis, the Lebanese state could have easily said, your resistance job is done. Now it's time to disarm. Remember, the Ta'if agreement, which concluded the civil war, basically ended with disarmament of all the militias that were operating during the civil wars, including militias like the Lebanese forces, Druze militias, except it left an exclusion clause for two militias: the South Lebanon army, which was present in the Israeli occupied zone, which was working in collaboration with Israel to basically, guard that zone, and Hezbollah, and that was part of the agreement that led eventually to Taif. Once the Israelis left and the southern Lebanese army basically dissolved itself, a lot of its members either fled to Israel and some of them came back to Lebanon. They had some, you know, trials, which were symbolic trials for their collaboration with Israel, and then they were let go. Then the only militia with arms that was left, and which is contrary to the clause of Ta'if agreement, which called for all militias to be disbanded and for the state to control all means of violence and decisions over war and peace in the country. So Hezbollah was left, and so that was the moment. If the state was strong enough, they could have forced Hezbollah disarm. The fact that Syria at the time was so powerful as an actor inside Lebanese politics, it had its army in Lebanon, basically occupying the country, and it was really controlling the political life of the country, through threats, through persuasion. But they were literally the governor of Lebanon at the time between 2000 and 2005. They prevented the disarmament of Hezbollah because Hezbollah became part of their own deterrence architecture against Israel. And so that was the time which was missed, in my opinion, in Lebanon's contemporary history, 2000, when Hezbollah could have been disarmed. And we would be today on a total different political trajectory and economic trajectory. That was missed. And thanks to, again, Syria's protection, Syria's support, the role that Hezbollah played in defeating Israel, its political power, you know, was strengthened to the nth degree. And the other political stakeholders in Lebanon were intimidated and could not really contest that power. And that continued until 2005. 2005, the late Prime Minister Rafik Hariri was assassinated. Now we know mostly it was Syrian plot, with some help from Hezbollah. And in 2005, between 2005 and 2024, I think Hezbollah's, because it was only armed militias, and at some point it has become an army inside the state, basically a non-state army inside the state, and was able through assassination, intimidation, threats to basically impose its way and its will on everything that happened in Lebanon. And that was the case between. And then they have also, after the 2006 war, they were able to work out some kind of a, how to say, implicit mutual state of deterrence in South Lebanon. And so after 2006, the Israelis and the Hezbollah came in a way implicitly to an understanding of certain ground rules not to violate, in terms of their conflict with each other. They remain, of course, enemies, but there were certain ground rules that they were, following. And so again, because of that, the southern Lebanon and the southern suburb of Beirut because there were no attacks, they were, under total control of Hezbollah, became really places in Lebanon that where Hezbollah was exercising total control over its society, its politics, its security, and that also strengthened, Hezbollah more, and they were able to also strike deals, understanding with Michel Aoun, the former president of Lebanon, and that gave them a political Christian umbrella, you know. And so Lebanon became governed by a Maronite Shiite partnership, right? At the heart of which underpinned it and kept it there for so long, Hezbollah's weapons and Hezbollah's armed militias, right? Until 2024, when I mean, and then eventually also during that time, Hezbollah was able to, approved in a way a maritime deal, border deal between Lebanon and Israel. So it started becoming more of a, pragmatic actor at certain times. And then you had the October 7, uh, Hamas terrorism against Israel. And after that, Nasrallah's decision to join that war, ending with his killing, with the decapitation of the top military leadership of Hezbollah, and um, and so and I think today Hezbollah can no longer basically impose its will, and that's why the unfortunate part is that until February 28th, right, between the ceasefire agreement between Lebanon and Israel mediated by the Americans in 2024 until February 28th of this year, the Lebanese government had really made decision to reassert authority, and there was really um, un, a unique, unprecedented moments of and decision making by the Lebanese presidency, Lebanese prime minister, to retake the state authority, for the state to reassert its authority. And part of it was deployment of the Lebanese army into the south. Part of it are decisions to outlaw Hezbollah's military part. And so they were able to do that. And then February 28th, happened. And after that, March 2nd, decision by Hezbollah to join the war. And that momentum, which was generated after 2024, between 2024 and February 28th of this year, in my opinion, has stalled. Now, have we lost it? I don't know. Recently, even under intense pressure, this government was able to make some bold decision, declaring the Iranian ambassador persona non grata. This is like, you could not ever imagine that in the past 20 years of Lebanon ever happening. Um, Recently, yesterday, declaring Beirut as a city disarmed, without any weapons. Now, okay, a lot of these measures are performative, including the persona non grata of the Iranian ambassador. We haven't yet seen the government moving to enforce that and to implement that. But still, these are very important moments. Now, going forward, I think Lebanon's fate is very much linked to what happens in the Iran US negotiations. I think this is because the regional proxies are going to be part of those negotiations. And Hezbollah is the primary of proxies of the Iranian regional proxies. Although what's happening is that you are going to have now Israeli Lebanese launched negotiations, right? In DC next week. And I think on purpose, the Americans, as well as the Lebanese government, wanted to make sure that the Lebanon file is separated from the Iran US file, partly to say that it's the Lebanese government that has to negotiate with Israel for the future of the country, including the future of Hezbollah. And so I think that's also a win for the Lebanese government. Anyway, the Lebanese government had already, again, one of those decisions, unprecedented decision, calling for direct negotiation between Israel and Lebanon. And so I think the fact that we're going to have these negotiations now launched, I don't think the meeting next week is going to be, you know, anything more than just performative meet and greet, and then at best it will agree to meet again sometime in the near future, but it's not going to lead to any kind of breakthrough.
Lebanon is a complex state in many ways. Religiously, Shia and Sunnis, Alawites and Druze, we have Christians, different denominations. The country is already scarred with a civil war. There is a long lasting economic crisis. What is happening under the surface, economically and socially, that we are not seeing in the headlines?
Yeah, I mean, the country has been in two wars, dragged by Hezbollah in two wars within the span of 18 months. I mean, that's how bad it is, adding to all the previous wars before and the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon in the past. Uh, Look, today, if you look at, there's depolarization in the country, but it's depolarization of almost everybody else against Hezbollah. I mean, in there are no Christian allies for Hezbollah. There are pretty much no Sunni allies for Hezbollah. There are definitely no Druze allies for Hezbollah. I mean, we have the Shiite duo, which is Hezbollah and ML movement, right? And even we are starting to see fissures between the ML movement and Hezbollah. At the level of the population, I think overwhelmingly, if you do, you know, opinion polls today, they are going to blame Israel and Hezbollah equally. You know, for me, the best example of where the Lebanese population is today, this woman, Christian woman, whose brother was killed by an Israeli missile in an area that is not uh, Hezbollah controlled. Even this woman said, we have two enemies. We have Israel and we have Hezbollah. This is, in my opinion, now I mean, if Israel thinks that it's endearing itself to a majority, to a group of the Lebanese by doing what it did 2 days ago, I don't think it succeeded in that. I mean, it's just definitely not endearing itself. So now we are in a state where the population looks at Israel and at Hezbollah as equally their enemies, as the parties that are leading their countries into the destruction. And so, and so and 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 if you take the Shia constituency out of this general population, we are talking about what, 5 to 6 million people. The Shia, we haven't had census since 1932. So we estimate the percentage of each community depending on the voter rolls, because when you do vote, it shows you are Shia, you are Sunni, so pretty much Sunni and Shia are almost the same numbers, like 25 to 26% of the population. And if you take that Shia population, I would divide it into like three sectors, three circles, right? Intersecting circles. So you have the core supporters of Hezbollah, and this is about maybe 30%, right? These are the people who fight for Hezbollah, right? Their sons are fighting. These are the people who have been working with Hezbollah for generations. There are families now where you have had 3 generations of that family, grandfather, father, now the grandson, who have either fought for Hezbollah, worked with Hezbollah, lived off Hezbollah salaries. 3 generations of a family, right? This is part of that 30% core, right? You have also people who are ideologically wedded to Hezbollah and to the principle of resistance. And that would include also some Christian and some Sunni, huh? But it's not a large percentage of that. But of the Shia, we'll say 30% are Hezbollah, what I call the core supporters. These are it's like the 30 to 35% of Trump voters, right? These are people who are not ever going to leave Trump, and that group will never ever leave Hezbollah, right? But that's not enough for Hezbollah to declare itself as being representative of the Shia. And then you have about anywhere 5 to 6% maybe of the Shia who are deep core opponents of Hezbollah, right? People who are leftist, secularist, but also people who just think Hezbollah has been dragging the community into one catastrophe after the other, and believe in their community being part of Lebanon, and not being um, loyal to foreign agendas, especially the Iranian agenda. And then you have this this large group within the Shia, right? 60 to some percent people who are basically, I would say, they will vote for Hezbollah usually in regular times, Hezbollah candidates. They will vote for Amal because, the way the confessional system dominates the political apparatus of Lebanon. I mean, Shia can vote for these candidates, and mostly it's Shia. It has been Amal and Hezbollah candidates, very few Shia independent candidates, but they are not much because they don't have the political machinery that either Amal or Hezbollah have to be able to have an equal playing field in the election. So you have the 60+%. These are businessmen, middle class people who have never fought, their kids will, in fact, their kids live abroad, or work, and in Lebanon. Uh, they are not necessarily, and they are many of them are Amal supporters. There is still a lot of enmity between Amal and Hezbollah, although at the leadership level, no, it's going to be we sing together, we rise together when it comes to Amal and Hezbollah leadership. But at the mass, a lot of that 60+% will have some Amal supporters, but you have Shia who are not politically affiliated, but who see in Hezbollah and Amal as their political representatives. They will vote for that candidate. Maybe some will donate money, for Amal or Hezbollah. But these are the people now who are angry with Hezbollah. They are really, really angry with Hezbollah, partly because what have you done to us? I mean, these are people who have homes in southern Lebanon, totally now destroyed. They cannot go back to their homes. These are people who have businesses in southern Lebanon, totally destroyed, or businesses in the Dahi, totally destroyed. And they don't see anybody coming to their rescue, because Hezbollah has alienated, basically that the community from the neighborhood, right? And this is also a community that is very afraid of Syria, of the new regime in Syria that is going to come and basically exact its revenge for all the criminal activities that Hezbollah committed in Syria during their civil war. So there is deep fissure now inside the Shia community about the future. However, the bloodier Israel gets, the longer the occupation, the less able the Lebanese state through diplomacy to exact concession from the Israelis on withdrawal, on a ceasefire, I think the more the Hezbollah narrative will again gain credence, right? But we are really at a hinge moment where if the Lebanese state is able through diplomacy, able to exact these serious concession from Israel, which I doubt highly because they have very weak negotiating card at this moment. I think things can really change dramatically in terms of Hezbollah political fortunes going forward. But if this status quo continues and if persists, the occupation, along with the fear of annexation, and basically, I think what Israel wants is to have this occupation and to be able in the future to strike Hezbollah leadership, Hezbollah assets at will, as they have been doing since the ceasefire in 2024. And I think this permanent state of low war, low intensity conflict also is something that is going to be catastrophic for Lebanon, but also it's something that will, you know, how to say, entrench in the minds of the population, especially the Shia, that Israel cannot be trusted, that Israel is all about destroying us and destroying our country.
So we can say that it is too early to call whether Hezbollah is defeated or not. But if the group survives, what then?
It is down, but not out. Hezbollah is done, but not out. And if this conflict continues, it might regain its position. However, I think the polarization inside Lebanon is a major challenge for them to overcome. The inability to lead construction of the areas destroyed is also a major challenge for them. And the loss of Syria. The loss of Syria is going to be a major challenge for them to replenish whatever military arsenal they have been using now in this war. It's going to be a major challenge for them.
There is a ceasefire between United States and Iran, but Israel doesn't follow the US. The bombing of Lebanon continues. Is Israel successful in decoupling the Lebanese front from the regional one? Can Hezbollah or the Lebanese state survive a scenario where they are the only ones left without pause, without a ceasefire?
It's going to be very hard. It's going to be very, very, very hard for the Lebanese state to survive, given all the calamities it has already endured, including the economic collapse. If this were to continue, if this state were to continue, Hezbollah as a militia can always survive. I mean, they can go back to being the guerrilla that they started as in 1982. They can always do these hit and run attacks on the occupation of on the Israeli forces in the occupied southern Lebanon and play the long game with that. But again, the loss of Syria as their strategic depth is going to be a major challenge for them to overcome in the long term. And again, it's Iran's decision. Is it willing to abandon Hezbollah to this fate that you are portraying, which is really a bleak fate in the long term, for the sake of reaching an agreement with the US? If it does that, then whatever is left of the proxy architecture is going to, already it has been not defeated, but it has been degraded to a major way, in a major way. So if they were to abandon Hezbollah today to this fate that you are describing, I think the credibility cost, the reputational cost within that alliance architecture, and this infrastructure, the proxy architecture of Iran, it's going to be quite costly for Iran. And so it's, I think, in my opinion, that's the trap. And I think a lot of Iranian analysts are saying this is a trap being set for the Iranian leadership. And it's correct. It's a trap that's being set for the Iranian leadership. But it's going to be interesting because if Iran decides to go that way, basically, let's do the deal if we can get the deal that we can. And I'm skeptical that they can get the deal, the maximalist goals that they want, including the right to enrichment, which seems to be a non-negotiable line for them. It's also a non-negotiable red line for the American administration. So if they were to, let's say, get a deal that they feel comfortable with, and they need to stick with, and which is not going to include Lebanon, uh, then then the whole proxy architecture is going to be dealt a very heavy blow, which is good for the region. It's very good for the region because this proxy architecture has not helped the region, I would have to say. It has led to um, state fragility in many of the countries that these groups operate, whether Iraq, whether Yemen, whether, especially Lebanon. It has led to a lot of shadow wars, proxy wars between the Gulf countries and Iran in these different military theaters. And it will be good for Lebanon in the long term and then it will force Hezbollah to face this fate of being left alone in this fight without, again, the Syria transit route. I mean, they can always, smuggle weapons. They have been able to do that for Gaza for years and years and years. They can always smuggle weapons. But with Israel continuously pounding them, with them being continuously infiltrated by Israeli intelligence agency, with a government that is not welcoming to them, with a population that is in its majority, opposed to them, it's going to be very hard. It's not impossible, but it's going to be very hard for them to mount this line to continue this kind of resistance that they had done for a long time. And, it's interesting, yesterday I read the statement by one of their ministers in their Lebanese cabinet saying, we are not opposed to negotiations with Israel. We are opposed to the fact that Lebanon is going to these negotiations with a weak hand. Well, guess why Lebanon is going into these negotiations with a weak hand? Thanks to whom? Anyway, but at least they said we are not opposed to these negotiations, which is really very interesting. These are direct negotiations. This is a major concession by Hezbollah.
You mentioned a couple of times that Lebanon is in a deep economic crisis, and it is a lasting crisis. We have Israel, which is occupying the southern part of the country. You mentioned around 10%. We are talking about the division within the country. Is Lebanon going to be capable of managing these harsh waters undamaged and as a country as a whole and survive?
Doubtful. I'm not going to yet I'm not able to throw the towel basically and say, no, it's going to totally fail. I mean, Lebanon has survived many crises before, but this crisis is unlike any one before, to be very honest. It's really existential for Lebanon right now as a society and as the Lebanon that we know. And I've always said that this war will end, all wars will end, hopefully sooner the better. But then both Hezbollah and Lebanon will emerge from it damaged in some ways. They are not going to be able to emerge from it unscathed. And the question is how damaged, and who. And I think Hezbollah will emerge from it much more damaged than Lebanon. I think Lebanon will be able to, if there is support from the international community for reconstruction and for economic revival. I think that's going to be crucial. The problem is that right now we are stuck in this cycle. In a way, it's a vicious cycle. In a way, basically, it says um, in order to, as a recipe for to get out of this problem. So Israel has to withdraw, right, from. I mean, the sequence of how Lebanon can emerge from this eventually. Israel has to withdraw, right? The Lebanese army has to move into the south. Hezbollah has to be disarmed. Economic reconstruction has to follow. And then we're going to have elections. This is the sequence, the recipe for basically the recipe for the cure, for the solution. And herein lies the problems. If any one of these elements in the sequence does not take place, then that whole sequence will fall apart. If Israel does not withdraw, that means Lebanese army cannot move into the south. And especially if, let's say, Israel cannot withdraw and continue this level of attacks against Hezbollah, Lebanese army will not move into the south and regain its authority over the country. Hezbollah will not get disarmed under these conditions. Reconstruction money will not follow under these, unstable conditions. And so we will be stuck in this permanent state of low intensity conflict with 10% of the country occupied, with an economy that is shattered, without reconstruction money coming into the country, and with an armed resistance, and with a that is not going to be disarmed, and with a Lebanese army that is weak and not able to impose its authority. So this is the struggle: is how can we break out of this cycle and start moving down that sequencing of steps that are crucial to get us to a safe haven, right, as a country. And all of this is doubtful, questionable at this point, and that's a scenario that's really is worrying for me, is that Lebanon gets stuck as the only country in the region, right? Iran and the US will find their agreement, their modus vivendi. Israel will be left on its own to deal with Hezbollah and with Lebanon without any kind of restraint from the United States, as has been the case until recently. The Gulf will have its own challenges with Iran. And this is the new structural post-war reality that they have to deal with, which is the status quo ante cannot be restored in the Gulf because structurally things, have changed in the Gulf. And but still they will be able to manage. There is a lot of sovereign wealth funds that they will be able to manage. But Lebanon will be left on its own. And that's the worst case scenario for Lebanon. The worst case scenario for Lebanon. And then the question of can Lebanon survive? Then, for the first time, in my opinion, we are really facing the scenario of state collapse.
We've seen reports suggesting at least 6,500 casualties during the domestic unrest in Iran preceding this war. If the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is truly bruised internally with those events, is this ceasefire a strategic pivot for survival or just a tactical pause before they double down?
I think there is an ongoing debate about the ceasefire and the deal inside Iran. I mean, there is a argument that the regime needs this breather, needs this tactical pause, and to assert itself. Remember, we have been talking for a long time about the succession crisis in Iran. And now we have had this succession happen under very harsh conditions. You have a leader that people have not seen yet, who is rumored to be wounded and who has to assert himself. This has happened after, as you said, a major test of the Iranian legitimacy, Iranian regime legitimacy, and with a country that's going to emerge that is economically weaker, right? And in fact, more facing more challenges in meeting demands of the populace, and with a leadership that's again, whose legitimacy is going to be even more challenged going forward. And so there is this debate whether how all of this is going to be dealt with, and whether a deal, a tactical pause and a deal, is the way to deal with these challenges, especially if the deal provides sanctions. Look, I think the weaponization of the Hormuz Strait is here to stay, even if they reach a deal on free transit and free passage. But the fact that now everybody knows that Iran is able to close that strait and threaten the passage through that strait, and then the international community for a week has not been able to do anything about it. I think that reality is here to stay with, the market, with the energy market, and with the insurance companies, with the shipping companies, and that's going to create a challenge, going that's in a way that helps Iran continue to use the threat of the Strait of Hormuz as part of its deterrence architecture. But also the other factor that is not going to be resolved, in my opinion, likely to be resolved in with this, is what happened to Iran's nuclear program, right? Um, and if because despite the destruction that has been, that this program has suffered, there is still the know-how, the intellectual know-how. There is a 60% enriched uranium. There is infrastructure damage, but still exists. And then there is the will. And we have now an Iranian regime that's going to look at the nuclear weapon as more of a deterrent than any regime before it, and so it's going to be a major challenge between the weaponization of the strait and an Iranian regime that is capable and, in my opinion, willing going forward to develop a nuclear weapon. I think we are entering a period of instability in the whole region that we have not seen before. Uh, and that's a structural change that has been created by this war. And so we are, in a way, in an interregnum phase. The old regional architecture or the old understandings that guided the regional architecture are gone. There are new realities that have been created, new fait accompli, and and we don't know where we are heading. So we are in this period of instability, which is of transition between the old order. We don't know what the new order will look like, and this is and this transition, or this period of transition, is extremely dangerous for strategic stability and for the region. And so, so I don't see, excuse me, Iran. I don't see the region. I don't see the Gulf moving anytime soon into a new stable regional order. I see us moving into a long-term war of attrition, um, where it's going to have setbacks every now and then, low intensity conflict in the case of Lebanon, Israel, and no resolution of the structural drivers of what led us to here. The Palestinian issue is not resolved. Iran nuclear file is not resolved. We have now the weaponization or the threat that's always with Iran of the Strait of Hormuz. And we have this, we have a regime in Iran that, in fact, will double down on all of these issues that we talked about. The big question is the proxy network. And that's why Hezbollah makes a big difference. That's why if they abandon Hezbollah now, it's going to really lead a major blow to their proxy architecture. And so, although I think they are not going to, if they get to a deal, they are not going to sink the deal because of Hezbollah, but I think they are going to make sure that the situation in Lebanon is brought under some control, some kind of understanding as part of the deal. Partly because the proxy architecture will remain to be part of this regime deterrence architecture.
You mentioned that the regime in Iran is going to double down. The prospect of a war of attrition in the region, chasing the nuclear weapon from the Iranian regime. When we look at all of that, was this war a good choice? What was the reasoning for deciding to start this war?
It was Bibi Netanyahu who needed this war, not the region needed this war. And it was Bibi Netanyahu achieving what he has never been able to achieve with any previous presidents. Bibi Netanyahu has been pushing and arguing for a war with Iran for a long time, from George W. Bush to Barack Obama to Biden to Clinton. He has always made the argument that we need to go to war with Iran. And no American president decided, to go along with him. Every American president thought through it, looked at the second, third order consequences, and said no to Bibi Netanyahu. Until lo and behold, Bibi Netanyahu met his dream with Donald Trump. And you have a president who was convinced by Bibi that he's going to face his second Venezuela moment. That as he did in Venezuela, he was able to, get rid of a president that has been there for a long time and get his own person there. It took him 2-3 days and it was done. And Bibi was able to convince Trump that this is doable in Iran. And the first day of the war, or the first 2 days of the war, when they were able to eradicate, a good part of the top leadership, Trump was, wow, Bibi was correct. And then things started happening, and we are in a quagmire in a way. And Trump finds himself, and the country finds itself now in a quagmire. And Trump is looking for his face-saving exit. He's really looking for an exit. And that's what keeps his allies and the gods very worried, right? Because he can wrap up, get his ships back, and all his weaponry back, and they are left there between an expansionist Israel, led by a guy who believes himself as being the, as the God chosen person to, create this great state of Israel, expanded state of Israel, and between an Iranian regime that is bent on revenge, that's doubling down on everything that they have been, doing, proxy, nuclear, now weaponization of Strait of Hormuz. And you have these countries in the middle now, between these two enemies, which they are considering, except the UAE is of a different, on a different on a different part of the spectrum compared to the others, UAE and Bahrain, who now, as their officials are saying, they're going to double down in their relationship with the Americans, double down in their relationship with Israel. I don't see the other countries in the GCC countries, whether it's Qatar, whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it's Kuwait, whether it's Oman, look at Israel as an ally. I think another outcome of this war is that the Abraham Accords, in terms of Saudi, eventually joining, is dead as a proposal, as well as the other countries. And so you're going to have these Gulf countries now trying to find, a new balancing act in a way between these two between these two powers, regional powers that they would be facing, uh, Iran and Israel. And so, no, the war is pretty much illegal as far as I'm concerned, as far as legal scholars. There was no imminent threat to the United States from Iran, as Mr. Trump has been arguing. Um, the civilian toll, the targeting of civilian infrastructure are usually considered war crimes, as has been the case with the first attack on a school, girls' school in Tehran. Uh, and the outcome of this war is not going to be great in terms of reining in the Iranian nuclear file or reining in the Iranian proxy architecture or ensuring the stabilities of our partners and allies in the Gulf. In the Gulf. And so, as I said, it has created this transition now period between two regional orders, which is going to be highly unstable for the near future.
The regional countries are among the biggest exporters of oil and gas in the world. This is now interrupted for a foreseeable future. After two failed negotiations and now the full war, we have Iran, which is most probably going to try to gain nuclear weapons. Abraham Accords with countries that haven't joined yet are at the moment in shreds. So, how in the God's name was Bibi Netanyahu thinking that this war and destabilizing the region will make Israel safer? Or am I missing something from that picture? What was his idea?
His idea was regime collapse. His idea was decapitate that top tiers of the regime, and it still remains. And that's where the daylight between the U.S. and Israel. I think in the beginning, definitely regime collapse was part of, uh, and in fact, regime change. I mean, although now they claim, Trump does not claims the opposite of that. But if you read his first message to the nation on February 28th, I was listening to it as it was happening. And I looked at my husband and I said, boy, we are going for regime change. It's all over this message. And now he says, no, 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 we are not for regime change. We are going to destroy, we wanted to destroy their navy, their capacities to produce missiles, prevent them indefinitely a pathway to a nuclear weapon. So these objectives keep changing. But initially, there was a convergence of interests between at least Trump and Bibi Netanyahu around the idea of regime change. Now the Israelis are saying, "Oh, it's not regime change; it's regime collapse. That's what we are for." And and um, and then it changed from inside. And the regime proved more cohesive than anybody expected. There are fissures inside the regime. It survived the killing of its leader. It survived the killing of all of its military and intelligence leaders. It survived the destruction, which is going to be. Now, post war, once the deal is concluded, post war, regime has serious issues with legitimacy. And then that can happen. Regime change can happen, but it's going to be Iranian led, Iranian, produced, and because the conditions on the ground will be how to say conducive to that kind of internal organizing in terms of sentiment and mood. But right now, you are seeing Iranians rallying behind the flag, given the destruction that is being done to their country. And words like, we want to, Trump's words, destroy civilization, bring them back to the Stone Age. These are not endearing terms to the Iranians, even those who are opposed to the regime. Iranians, it doesn't matter whether it's under the Shah, whether it is, under this regime, they are deeply nationalistic, deeply nationalist people. They really, the nation of Iran is deeply important for them. And when you start talking about killing, destroying an old civilization as old as the Iranian civilization, and bringing their country, and they are proud of their country achievements, to the Stone Age, then you are definitely losing an important constituency that should have been instrumental in your project of regime change and regime collapse. If you lost that constituency, then and it's well known, research has shown clearly, you cannot do regime change by air attacks. You cannot do that. And our attempt at doing regime change in Iraq, boy, it has cost us a lot, you know. And still, Iraq is not as stable as, but it's, in my opinion, Iraq is better than it was under Saddam Hussein. But 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 Iraq still, after so many years since that invasion in 2003, is still struggling with its political dynamics and with its you know with its economics, with the relationship between society and between state and citizens. So there are still a lot of problems in Iraq so many years after, partly because this was caused by an external intervention and not by an internal organic movement to go against the regime. And compare, for example, Syria versus Iraq, how quickly the Syrian regime, the new authorities in the regime, were able to consolidate control, and how long it took for the Iraqi new regime to consolidate control. I mean, and partly because this was an organic, of course, helped and shaped by external assistance from Turkey, from Qatar, but still it was an organic revolution that led to a regime change, right? Whereas in Iraq, it was an external intervention. No, I mean, no. I mean, the Saddam Hussein was not endeared. It was not a loved regime. It was not, but it was still it was external intervention by U.S. forces that led to regime change. And so it's interesting to now compare the pace of regime consolidation in Syria versus in Iraq. And I think part of the reason is how that regime change happened. And so that should be a telltale sign also about Iran.
Dr. Slim, honestly, I look how to wrap up this interview in the positive way, and it's hard.
A challenge they and in a positive way. I mean, it's like we really have to, you know, really force ourselves to go into uncharted territory here. Yes.
Exactly. This was like a huge earthquake. In your opinion, how long will it take for the ground to calm down? And what will the region look like once everything settles down?
This is not, look, I don't think this is a time for a final settlement. I mean, the negotiations that are happening in Islamabad, if they continue, remember, they have a deadline of April 22nd. I mean, this administration wants to resolve, the nuclear program, the proxy issues, the sanctions, the Strait of Hormuz. They want to resolve all of these issues in the span of 2 weeks. It took the Obama administration, I think, 2 years and a half, I think, to just come out with the JCPOA, which was purely focused on the nuclear issue. And now this administration want to resolve all of these major issues in 2 weeks. So that gives you an idea about the probability of a deal. So this is not, this is a, I mean, this administration anyway approaches any kind of deal making through a transactional lens, right? Short-term transactional lens, and not as a means to produce structural transformational change and durable settlements. And so I think whatever is going to emerge out of this is going to be, again, it's going to, this transition moment we are in the region is going to be challenged, constantly challenged. It's going to face setbacks. If there is a deal that will emerge, we might return to, wars and then have to go to deal making again. But we are not in a final settlement moment. We are in a transactional deal making moment, which is fragile at best, and which is going to evolve depending on how dynamics on the ground evolve and how different actors position themselves. I mean, I can see easily two spoilers emerge to any deal reached in Pakistan, in Islamabad. One is Israel, that doesn't want, you know, for that deal to happen, especially if it's going to constrain it in Lebanon, definitely. If it's going to constrain its activities in Lebanon, Israel does not want that deal. And you are going to have also hardliners inside the regime, inside the Iranian regime, who believe this is a victory moment for them. I mean, they truly believe Iran is emerging victorious from this. And why are we going to let go of all these achievements for, for this deal, and instead of us going further and trying to, enshrine these victories and even seek more victories. So this is this. And then we have basically two parties, in this case, the United States going there thinking it won. And you have, and it is, and then Iran also going there thinking it won. And each one of them thinks it can get concessions on red lines from their opponent, which is so difficult. So the whole picture of the possibility of a deal that is going to satisfy both parties is definitely not achievable in 2 weeks. So the best I think the Islamabad can achieve is a framework for an extension of the peace of the cause. And then, in order for, the negotiations to continue. That's, in my opinion, the best they can achieve. But then during that extended pause, you are going to have, again, these spoilers going to continue to try to derail the deal at all. And then you have a president who at some, who doesn't have patience for these long-term deal-making processes, who believes in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maximum time frame for a deal to get done. And so, and he will get bored with the process. And he's definitely not into a peace process he's not a peace process kind of person. He's more a deal-making kind of person.
Dr. Slim, thank you so much to talking to Frontlines and Backrooms and for your time.
Thank you very much for hosting me. It's also the pleasure is mine to be conversing about these important issues with you.
After weeks of escalation, strikes, and competing narratives, this war is still unfolding. But the key questions remain. What is this war really? Who is achieving what and at what cost? And what is actually changing in the region? And now, with the United States announcing a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the stakes have shifted once again. On Wednesday, we step back from the headlines and look at the bigger picture. Mouin Rabbani joins Frontlines and Backrooms for a deeper assessment of the war with Iran. Not as it is presented, but as it is unfolding. A structural analysis and look at what may come next. If you value long-form conversation that go beyond headlines and sound bites, consider to subscribe and support this project. It is because of the listeners like you that we are able to continue the Backrooms dialogue independent and in-depth. You can find the link to join in the show description. You've been listening Frontlines and Backrooms, and until Wednesday, keep looking beyond the noise.